Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and this is the second half of a program. You may have seen the first half. It's going to make a lot more, the second half will make a lot more sense if you do see part one. I think it's entitled on YouTube, it's going to be entitled Stories the CIA and the U.S. Don't Want You to Know. And the story, the topic was really inspired by a movie trailer I saw about Gary Webb. And as I said before, Gary Webb was a reporter for the San Jose newspaper. And in 1996, he broke a story. It was the most widely read story on the web. I think the website got 1.4 million hits a day. And in the story, Gary Webb wrote about the connection that he had found between the CIA and the crack cocaine epidemic in Southern California. And immediately after the story broke, there was a backlash in media. Washington Post, the LA Times, they began attacking Gary Webb and the story. And Gary Webb knew this was going to happen, and so he uploaded onto the internet all these documents, thousands and thousands of pages of documents that filled it up. These documents were downloaded all over because the story was so extraordinary. Now, I came of age in the 1960s. Not only was I really aware of drugs, I was aware of the CIA's complicity in the sales of these drugs to fund their own activities. After World War II, the CIA worked with the old Kuomintang, the Taiwan Chiang Kai-shek government that had been forced out of China, into what is now called the Burma Triangle, the Golden Triangle. And Chiang Kai-shek's army, the remnants of it, got into opium production. It was sold all over the world via the connections in the CIA. Later on, the Nguyen Han Bank, a bank it was a bank basically run by ex-military officers, and they were a front also to launder these millions of dollars flowing through them. I knew about it because I knew about this stuff. And I knew most people didn't because they didn't know about it. The story wasn't told in the media, generally. And the fact, if you wanted to know about it, you had to dig hard. And I knew most people were not digging hard enough to know about these things. So when the story broke by Gary Webb in 1996, it was sort of shocking to the mainstream media and to those who didn't know. To myself, I was shocked that it was getting, finally, the attention it deserved. Well, what happened is Gary Webb was ridden out of town on the media ride. He was fired from his post at the San Jose Times, and in 2010 committed suicide, allegedly. In Sacramento, he was found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to the head, and the coroner ruled it was suicide. Well, a month ago, I saw a trailer for the movie called Gary Webb. Now, I have seen other movies that have been produced, had major distribution, and between the trailer and the showing, a lot happened. They tended to disappear. If they were topics about that the American press, the CIA and the government, the financial boys didn't want you to know. But seeing Gary Webb's name, seeing the trailer, struck a chord in me because it brought to me another story that also was shut out by the media. And as I explained in part 1 of this series, it happened because I had run into Howard Hughes' banker in 1986. I was starting a 10-year prison sentence. Norman was in the middle of a 4-year prison sentence. And we had somehow met, quote, by circumstance. And let me assure you folks, I don't believe in circumstance anymore. I never really did. One of my sayings was, fate once again masquerading as an accident. I didn't know if Norman really was Howard Hughes' banker, but what I'm going to show you today is going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was. Norman, when I met him, believed that he was innocent, that he'd been framed. He never told me what he was in there for until March, until 3 or 4 months. His appeal got turned down. Norman and I had become friends. He knew I wrote, all right? And if you've seen that movie, Grand Budapest Hotel. It opens up with a story by the writer saying, most people think that these writers make up stories and they research them, and many of them do. But to some writers, the story comes to them because the person with the story knows they're a writer. This is how the Grand Budapest Hotel opened. And when I saw it for the third time, I turned to Martha and I said, that's how Norman's story found me. The story found me. Norman knew I was a writer. I had written a lot of stuff. I was writing when I was there. And when his appeal got turned down, he took me to his room. He said, I want to show you things. I want to tell you a story. And I want you to write down this story. And I want you to have it in safekeeping. And so I did. And I went through it on the first part of this program, part one. I told about how Norman found himself approached by members of a CIA front organization called Transglobal Productions Limited. All right? I think here you see this is it. This is the letter that Norman showed me for the first time. All right? And it's a letter on the letterhead of Transglobal Movie Productions. This is what he showed me in 1986. I looked at it, and Norman said, and I'm looking at this letter, and it's written to a Lord Cranborne, 2 Swan Walk, London, England, and it says, Dear Lord Cranborne, as I have been unexpectedly delayed here in California finalizing the paperwork for the financing request on the film project, Jihad, I thought, as of this moment, I'm introducing you to Dr. Bernard Therian, President of International Banking Services and former international banker to Howard Hughes. He will be arriving in London during the week of February 21st in order to represent us in securing the commitment for our financing. Well, Norman was the one who handed me these papers. I'm reading it for the first time, and he said, look at the board of directors. All right? And you see on this, there's a list of the board of directors right here. All right? And so I read it. And the first person on the board of directors' name is Robert E. Cushman, Jr., USMC, retired. Okay, that's what it says on the letterhead. Norman said, do you know Cushman? Have you ever heard of him? I said, no. Well, he said, I want to tell you something. USMC retired means he was Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. And in addition to being the former Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, he was the former Director of the CIA. The story Norman proceeded to tell me was quite astounding. Here was an alleged movie production company that approached Norman in the spring of 1983, asking him to raise funds from the Saudis, all right, for a film project, of which this is a letter of introduction. The alleged purpose was not the film. It was merely a front, a cover story. The real story was that they had approached Norman to approach the Saudis and request a backing of $3 billion. What was going to happen within the next half year, Norman was going to do as requested. He said he told them up front, he didn't believe this was going to go anywhere. It was such a preposterous request, that his fee was 2% of money raised, which was $10 million. What was going to happen was eventually going to send Norman Therian to prison, where he was going to tell me this story that he never intended to tell anybody. And in the first half of this story, I tell what happened. I walked around with Norman for weeks in prison, and eventually I did what he asked me to do. I wrote down the story, and I had it sent away for safekeeping, so no one had it. Well, this is what happened. Norman, once he knew the story was secreted away, he comes to me with a letter, and he shows it to me. And I look at this letter, and it's addressed to Otis Chandler. I knew who Otis Chandler was. Otis Chandler was the publisher of the LA Times. And I read this letter, and Norman is writing it. It says, Dear Mr. Chandler, you may remember me from my times with Howard Hughes. I remember you and your wife Happy. All right, that was her name. All right? He said, I see that you're running a series of articles on Afghanistan. I have certain information about Afghanistan that you may be interested in. All right? Blah, blah, blah. yours truly, Norman Bernard Therian, blah, blah, blah. And I went, great! Norman's going to expose the story of the Republican skim and embezzlement of $500 million that I now knew to be true. And he's going to send this to Otis Chandler, and the world's going to know about it. I was to find out that he had no intention of so doing. He showed me the letter, which he had written. What I didn't know was this. Norman then sent a copy of that letter to a very highly placed Republican lawyer in the Republican National Committee. Now, in the previous program I told you Norman knew about the world of politics and money. He worked for Howard Hughes. Norman told me in our conversation that Norman was in charge of doing the financing for the Marina del Rey project in Los Angeles. All right? Norman told me that Howard Hughes' partner in the project was Herb Kalmbach, the personal attorney of Richard Nixon. And as I said before, Kalmbach wasn't brought in for his financing. Howard Hughes didn't need money. He was brought in because of the access he had to Richard Nixon. Hughes was buying off the presidency. All right? So, when these people came to him and asked him to make certain phone calls to the Saudis who he was doing oil deals with, and they knew it, Norman wasn't fazed. He did as requested, and ultimately he made the phone calls. The initial down payment for the $3 billion was to be $500 million. And as I said in the previous story, it started going sideways when General Robert Cushman called up Norman. Everything was going hunky-dory, and he let him in on another part of the deal. The deal was this. Cushman was telling Norman that they had arranged at Transglobal to buy arms captured by Israel during the Six-Day War. It was a Six-Day War with Syria. That happened in 96, 97. All right, or 86, back then, 86, 87. I don't remember the year. And the Israelis had all these NATO, had these Soviet bloc weapons, because Syria was armed by the Soviets. And when Syria tried to invade Israel, and Israel just drove them back, they dropped all the weapons, the tanks, and they ran, and Israel had them. So Cushman said, what we're going to do, Norman, is we have one of the members on the board of directors. I want to show it here you again. All right, here we are. See the board of directors? All right. The board of director, the second to the last one, you can't read it here, I'll read it for you, of Transglobal Productions is Rabbi Morton Rosenthal. For those of you with a computer, you might want to Google Morton Rosenthal. I had no idea who he was. All right. Morton Rosenthal, you'll find out, is a member of the JDL, the Jewish Anti-Defamation League. All right, a really radical group that supports Israel in all its things. Cushman told Norman that through Morton Rosenthal they were going to buy these captured arms that the Israelis had in warehouses sitting around for decades with the money that Norman was raising from the Saudis, and then they were going to sell them at a higher price to the Afghan resistance. Norman exploded when Cushman told him this. Why? Because the Saudis were Norman's clients. Norman knew the Saudis. He had brought them to the table. He had made the proposal. And he told Cushman, if the Saudis ever find out this is what you're doing with their money, they're going to have a holy cow. The Saudis hated the state of Israel. And Norman felt that if they found out that they were taking the Saudi money, buying arms, allowing the Israelis to profit, and them profiting in the middle, his relationship with the Saudis would go up in smoke. Well, Robert Cushman assured Norman he wasn't going to do it. What happened was this. 3 weeks later, a month later, Norman finds out his ex-oil partner shows up with a letter. A letter from Robert E. Cushman to Norman. Here's the letter. All right? This is the letter. You see that here? That's the Marine Corps flag. All right? The address, 12318 Firth of Tay Drive, Fort Washington, Maryland, 26th of December, 1983. That's General Robert E. Cushman's home address. It is addressed to Dr. Bernard Norman Therian by the hand of Ronald Soblosky. Let me read you the letter. Dear Norman, I have sent this letter with Ronald Soblosky to confirm that I have authorized him to represent me and our group. In other words, he kicked Norman out of the deal. Norman had no idea that Soblosky was a part of the deal. All right? The reason why Soblosky delivered that, Soblosky was one of Norman's partners in doing oil deals with the Saudis. Norman had no idea that Perry Morgan, let's go back to here, folks. He is vice president of Transglobal Movie Productions, who sent the letter to Lord Cranborne in London. Perry Morgan's real last name was Soblosky. Perry Morgan and Ronald Soblosky were brothers. And I'm going to show you a genealogy that proves this later on in what I did after I found out this story. Norman had been set up, and I asked Norman, I said, Norman, you know, because I met him in prison. I said, Norman, and he told me, Darryl, he said, this was a setup. And he told me the story of how it came to me. Well, I'm getting beheaded or behind myself. What happened was this. Norman sent the letter addressed to Otis Chandler, the publisher of the LA Times, not to expose the Republican embezzlement of the $500 million he had raised from the Saudis. He had sent the letter threatening a blackmail, basically, that he knew what had happened, he had documents to prove it, he had the story put outside in case they were going to kill him when he was in prison, all right? And he told this Republican lawyer, listen, what do you think about the letter? Of course, the Republican lawyer called up Norman immediately, and he said, don't do anything, I'm going to show up. I'll be there. Norman was real happy. He said this was his ticket. This is why he had told me the story. This is why he wrote it down. He was trying to leverage his knowledge to get out of this prison sentence that he thought he had been set up for. So what happened is that a month later, 2 weeks later, I think, I have no idea about the time, but a short time after that, Norman gets a call to the visiting room at Lompoc Federal Prison Camp. He comes back. Norman is elated. He tells me the lawyer showed up with two men. One was a close relative to Paul Laxalt. Then the governor of the state, I think he was a governor, senator in the state, senator probably in Nevada, and Laxalt was at that time running for the presidential election in 1988. Who else accompanied him was a close relative of Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from Utah. They were there to see what Norman wanted. Norman sat there and he said, I want justice. And they knew what he meant. And they said, don't worry, we'll talk to William Wilson. Norman was elated. Month went by, Norman talked to him 2 months, 3 months. Word came back that they had told William Wilson, and William Wilson's part of the story. Part of the skim was going to him, part of the skim was going to Reagan. In fact, I'll show you documents here that the skim may have been far larger than I had even imagined at that time. So Norman got out of jail, not because he leveraged it. His 4-year sentence was over. Norman wrote me and he said, Darryl, forget about the story. Nobody wants to hear it. Well, the truth of the matter is, Norman didn't want the story known. Norman was a banker. He had run in international corridors of power. And the less they knew that he had been in prison, the better off his ability to do banking deals was. He was a private banker at the highest level. Not only had he worked with Howard Hughes, before I told, and I said in this last program, he worked with Daniel K. Ludwig, the richest man in the world at the time, richer than Howard Hughes himself. Ludwig was the #1 on the Forbes 500 list the first year it came out. After Hughes, he worked with Adnan Khashoggi. That's how he got to know the Saudi royal family. Norman did not want this story out, and I had the story. I had the story. So what did I do? Well, I'm a disaffected hippie from the 60s. I had no love for the Republican Party. Remember the Just Say No, the war on drugs? I knew what they thought about hippies, and I know what we thought about them. There was no love lost. So I wrote a letter. San Francisco Chronicle, they're running a series of stories on what was going on in prison through some guy who had just gotten out and stuff. So I said, listen, I'm from San Francisco. And I told him, I was on Dianne Feinstein's China Committee, all right? When I think in 1977, the San Francisco Chronicle ran a story, and my rug company was on the front page of their business section with a picture of me in these Chinese rugs, all right? Foreign trade zone. So I said, this is who I am. I just have some very information here from Howard Hughes' ex-banker, and I detailed it. I didn't hear back. Okay? I didn't hear back. So I had this story. I threw the I Ching. The I Ching said, the story will be told by not now, but not now. This is 1988, 89. All right? I have all the data. All right? I write letters to LA Times. I write letters to these other newspapers telling them what they have. I don't hear back. All right? So I get out of prison in 1992. I have this information. All right? I have all this information that you are going to see later that Norman gave me about what had happened. I sent him copies. They didn't want to hear it. So I decided now I'm out, I can go see Dianne Feinstein. I knew Dianne. I had gone to China with her in 1982. I had been appointed to her China Committee in 1978 in San Francisco. All right? I received presidential invitations when Deng Xiaoping came to the United States. I was a rather unusual hippie. I lived in both these worlds. All right? So I called up Diane's office and I said, I have a story I want to tell to somebody. So I'm in San Francisco and Peter, her aide, her top aide, meets me. I know Peter. Peter knows me. We've gone to China together. 1982. All right? I was part of the business subcommittee representing the city of San Francisco, and I gave a talk in Shanghai on U.S.-China trade. Dianne was so impressed that her personal lawyer came over and thanked me for it, and she did the next day. So I told Peter Norman's story. And as I told the story, I could tell that Peter didn't want to hear it. Nothing happened. So I called up Nancy Pelosi. Maybe she's a Democrat. Maybe she would want to know. I knew the Republicans didn't want to hear. I mean, I'm so crazy. I'm sitting there in prison. I thought of writing the Department of Justice, which was run by the Republicans. And I made a joke about it in my book, where I tell the story, Light in the Dark Place. And I said, that's like calling up the Gestapo in 1939 and saying a nice Jewish family down the street has disappeared. Would they investigate? They were a real nice family, and I think something funny going on. So I write to the Gestapo saying, could you please investigate? So I never wrote the letter to the Republicans. But when I got out, not only did I write to, I talked to Dianne Feinstein's people, Nancy Pelosi's people. I'm reading along later that Webb Hubbell is in trouble. Remember him? The banker friend of Bill Clinton, all right? Got in trouble for the bank in Atlanta, all right? See, he's being grilled by the Republicans. I thought, hey, Webb could use a little help. So I find his phone number in Washington, D.C. I call it up. Nice lady answers. Southern voice. Is Webster there? No, he isn't. This is Mrs. Hubbell. May I help you? I go, well, I'm trying to get some information to Webster, Mr. Hubbell. She said, please send it here. I'll make sure he gets it. All right? I send this data. Letters. I mean, this included letters from French bankers, Saudis, professor from USC, all right? Data on what had happened. Nothing. What I'm going to show you is documents very few people have ever seen. And it's something I want to share because the media doesn't want to talk about it. And so this is probably the only chance you're going to get it unless you want to get my book, Light in a Dark Place, which has some of the documents in it. The first document is this, all right? This is a letter. You can't see it. Okay. There it is. There it is. This is from the LA Times, December 4th. Norman had told me the story that there had been a blackout. I mean, that there had been an embezzlement of the $500 million. Nobody else knew about it. And in this December 4th issue of the LA Times, they find out that there's a $500 million has been commingled with the Iran-Contra money. Money that was used to buy Soviet bloc weapons for the Afghan resistance. This is the fight that Norman got in trouble with. All right? I knew that. No one else did. Here's another one. This is a handwritten note from Lord Cranborne. If you want to Google Lord Cranborne, you'll find out that he was head of the UK committee to coordinate resistance money for the Afghan resistance. This is written in Lord Cranborne's handwriting. This is a letter written by Norman to the president of the Banque de Commerce Extérieur, confirming that they were negotiating with the Saudis for a $3 billion deposit. The $500 million that was ultimately transferred was the part of a $3 billion agreement that they were going to put through. What you see here next is the letter from General Cushman telling Norman that he's being replaced by Ronald Soblaski. Here is a letter, all right, written from on the USC letterhead to Prince Bandar, talking about General Cushman's private part of the budget of the $500 million. Now, I want to say something about Nate Kamrani, the name right here. In 2005, I met Nate Kamrani. He was, I called him up, I Googled his name, and I met him at the premiere for Dodgeball. My friend Marshall Thurber's son, Rawson Marshall Thurber, had just written and directed a movie called Dodgeball that was going to be a huge hit. So I was going to be in Los Angeles. I decided to call up Nate Kamrani. He was there. He asked me if I knew anybody in the movie business. Perchance I did. I've known Rawson ever since he was born. He was now a movie director. So we met that night. And that night he confirmed many of the details that I had heard through Norman Bernard Therian. Nate Kamrani's name, newspaper article, LA Times. Nate Kamrani is saying the money never reached us. The money, people are talking about $500 million. The Afghans never got anything of it, and they never did. It was embezzled by the United States government, much of it to the Republican Party, perhaps $250 million, because $500 million had been transferred by the Saudis, and in the newspaper article by the LA Times, it said it was $250 million from the Saudis and $250 million from the US. The Republicans could have embezzled half that money for themselves. No one ever knew about it. I knew about it because Norman had told me the story. So this is where we are in America. There is much happening. This last one here, this is another one. This is a letter I wrote to the library, Ronald Reagan Library, asking for data on Ronald Soblaski. All right? Ronald Soblaski. I want to tell you something. I want to read something here. They told me they sent it. They never did. All right? This is... All right, let's go here. This is the files from Jonathan Sharfin, the Reagan Library collection. He was the final legal advisor to Ronald Reagan. The last one here says USA versus Poindexter, North Seacourt, Hakim. That's the Iran-Contra. Marcos, president of the Philippines. The last one, U.S. versus Ronald Soblaski, farm loan scheme. What is President Reagan's personal attorney doing with a farm loan scheme? The same scheme that was Norman was set up in 1983. This is a copy that I found on the internet about two people who are also on the letterhead of Transglobal, Rabbi Morton Rosenthal and John Speller. It said, 1 year before Mrs. Gandhi's assassination in India, Speller sponsored a visit by the group which was basically held responsible for the murder of Indira Gandhi. After Mrs. Gandhi's death, Rabbi Rosenthal and Speller, operating through a front company they had jointly established called Transglobal Resources, arranged a series of meetings in Washington, London, and Quito, Ecuador, which resulted in the Ecuadorian government offering this group a large land in Ecuador. The name of the company is Transglobal Resources. Transglobal Resources was the name of the front company approaching Norman. Well, now you've seen it. Now I've told the story that I heard in 1986 under extraordinary circumstances. I'm glad that I got to tell somebody it. Happened to be you. If you want to go over the web, it's all there. If you want to go look at this book, Light in a Dark Place, the story is told. But like Gary Webb's story, this is a story the United States government doesn't want told. For the clear reasons. They want you to keep thinking that they are who they are. And they're doing it for you. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves. Those who are in the seat of power. Those right now on both sides of the aisle. I'm not saying there are not honorable men there. But even the honorable ones have been compromised for the necessity to co-seat with power. And I'm going to tell you something. How I, who know this firsthand, who is cynical as almost anybody about power and politics, am positive, because I know that the world is falling apart. That the world is soon going to become a far better world, irrespective of who's sitting in the seat of power now. Thank you.